Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became the ultimate protector of Wakanda. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was screaming. It wasn't just the people, though their cries were a sharp, panicked counterpoint to the symphony of destruction. It was the city itself. The concrete and steel of Mizurufu, Japan, groaned in agony, its familiar geometry twisted into a nightmare canvas. Streets stretched like warm taffy, skyscrapers rippled as if struck by a stone in a pond, and the very air shimmered with the colors of an oil slick on water. At the heart of this geometric insanity stood a monster that defied the eye. It was a Nomu, but not like any Izuku Midoriya had faced before. It was a sleek, obsidian creature, its exposed brain pulsating not with raw power, but with a sickening, opalescent light. Where its limbs should have been were shifting, crystalline structures that refracted the world around it into 1,000 broken images. The heroes had dubbed it the Glimmer Noma. Its quirk was a form of localized reality warping, and it was tearing a hole in their world one distorted city block at a time. Uravity, report. Civilian status. Tenya Ida's voice, usually a paragon of authoritative calm, was strained, cutting through the comms system with a crackle of static. He was a blue and silver blur, trying to establish a perimeter that refused to stay put. They're trapped, Ingenium. Achiko Uraraka's voice was breathless. A city bus, on the Maruhashi Bridge. The Nomu bent the whole structure into a loop. I can't get close enough to make it float without its quirk affecting me, and if I get vertigo here, she didn't need to finish. A fall from that height, into a landscape that might turn to liquid or razors at a whim, was a death sentence. Izuku, his green costume already scuffed and torn, skidded to a halt on the edge of the chaos. His mind was a frantic storm of analysis, his eyes darting back and forth, trying to find a pattern, a weakness, a single immutable law in a place where physics had taken a holiday. One for all thrummed beneath his skin, a coiled serpent of power eager to be unleashed, but raw strength was useless against a foe you couldn't properly hit. Think, Izuku, think. What would All Might do? The question was a familiar refrain, but now it felt heavier. All Might was retired. The symbol of peace was a memory living in the hearts of the people. The responsibility was on his shoulders, on his generation's shoulders. Red Riot, can you create a stable path? Izuku yelled, his voice barely carrying over a sudden, deafening sound of grinding metal as a nearby building began to unscrew itself from its foundation. Trying Midoriya! Eijiro Kirishima's hardened form was a bastion of normalcy in the chaos. He slammed his fists into the warping asphalt, trying to create a solid, unchanging walkway. But it's like punching water. It just gives way and then snaps back. The Glimmer Noma turned its featureless head toward the trapped bus. The opalescent light in its brain pulsed faster, and the steel of the bridge began to creak ominously, threatening to shatter. There was no time. Analysis had failed. Teamwork was being stymied at every turn. All that was left was overwhelming, decisive action. It was a lesson he'd been trying to unlearn, a habit his body screamed at him for every time he indulged it. But the faces of the terrified civilians, pressed against the glass of the bus, sealed his decision. Everyone, fall back! Draw its attention away from the bridge! Izuku commanded, a new authority hardening his tone. Midoriya, what are you doing? Ida's voice was sharp with concern. Your body can't handle a high-output attack. We need a coordinated strategy. There's no time for one. Izuku shot back, planting his feet. The ground beneath him felt like setting gelatin, but he anchored himself with sheer will. He could feel the familiar, crackling energy of One for All surge from the core of his being, a raging wildfire that threatened to consume him from the inside out. Green lightning, brighter and more violent than ever before, exploded around him, kicking up dust and warp debris. One for all. 100%. The power was in agony and in ecstasy. It screamed through his veins, setting every nerve alight. He ignored the chorus of protests from his friends, ignored the searing pain that was already beginning to radiate from his arm. His focus narrowed to a single point, the pulsating, rainbow-hued brain of the Glimmer Noma. That was its core. Its engine. He had to break it. He crouched low, the energy building to a deafening crescendo. Delaware, He flicked his finger, but this was no simple air bullet. This was a cannonball of pure kinetic force, a focused hurricane designed not just to hit, but to obliterate. Smash! The world went white. The air itself seemed to shatter. The concussive blast tore a perfectly straight line through the warped reality, momentarily forcing the physics-bending field back to normalcy. The glimmer Nomu had no time to react. The compressed air struck its crystalline head with the force of a meteor. For a moment, there was a sound like 1,000 panes of glass shattering at once. The opalescent core fractured, spiderwebbing with cracks of pure, white light. The heroes and civilians alike shielded their eyes as the creature's reality-warping quirk went haywire in its death throes. But something was wrong. The energy didn't just dissipate. Izuku, his arm a mangled ruin of broken bones and torn muscle, felt a horrifying pull. The raw, untamed power of One for All, a quirk that stored the energy of 9 lifetimes, was interacting with the collapsing dimensional quirk of the Noma. It was like mixing fire and gasoline. The shattered core didn't explode outwards, it imploded. It became a pinprick of impossible darkness, sucking in light, sound, and matter. A rift, a wound in the fabric of the world, shimmering at its edges with colors that had no name. Deku! Uraraka's scream was distant, warped. Izuku tried to anchor himself, but he had nothing to hold on to. The gravitational pull from the rift was immense, absolute. He saw Kirishima charging towards him, his hand outstretched. He saw Ida's engines flaring as he tried to race to his side. They were too slow. The world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of screaming light and crushing pressure. He felt as if every cell in his body was being simultaneously torn apart and squeezed into a single point. His consciousness, his very sense of self, frayed at the edges. The last thing he registered before everything went black was the faint, echoing voice of a woman he had never met, a whisper from within his own soul, speaking a single, sorrowful word, goodbye. Pain was the first anchor. It was a familiar, almost comforting presence in the sea of nothingness. It was the sharp, grinding agony in his right arm, the dull throb that pulsed behind his eyes, and the deep, aching exhaustion that settled in his very bones. The second anchor was sensation. The feeling of thick, damp leaves pressed against his cheek. The oppressive, suffocating humidity that clung to him like a second skin, heavy with the scent of wet earth, blooming flowers with overwhelmingly sweet perfumes, and the pungent tang of decay. A cacophony of strange sounds assaulted his ears, the clicks, buzzes, and chirps of a million unseen insects, the guttural calls of strange birds, and the distant roar of some great beast. This was not Muzurifu. Izuku's eyes fluttered open. He was met with a canopy of enormous, emerald-green leaves, so dense that they blotted out the sky, allowing only dappled rays of sunlight to pierce the gloom. The trees themselves were titans, their bark a strange, almost metallic gray, with thick vines coiling around them like slumbering pythons. Strange, bioluminescent fungi cast a soft, blue-green glow from the forest floor. He pushed himself up with his good arm, a groan escaping his lips. His hero costume was in tatters. The right sleeve was completely gone, revealing an arm bent at an unnatural angle, already bruising a violent shade of purple. He was a wreck. But he was alive. Where am I? He staggered to his feet, his head swimming. He looked around, trying to get his bearings, but everything was alien. The flora, the fauna, the very air felt different. Thicker. More alive. He was in a jungle, but it was unlike any jungle he'd ever seen in books or on television. Through a small gap in the colossal trees, he saw something that made his breath catch in his throat. In the distance, silhouetted against the sky, was a structure. It was a tower, impossibly tall and slender, that seemed to be made of polished black stone and shimmering light. It was a piece of architecture so advanced, so elegant, it felt like it belonged to the distant future. A twig snapped behind him. Izuku's hero instincts, honed by countless battles, screamed to life. He spun around, dropping into a low defensive stance, the green lightning of One for All flickering weakly around his battered body. He was not alone. They emerged from the jungle's shadows not with a sound, but with a sudden, silent presence. They were warriors. Tall, statuesque women with shaved heads adorned with intricate tattoos. They wore striking crimson armor accented with gold rings around their necks and arms, and they carried long, gleaming spears with tips that seemed to hum with a quiet energy. Their faces were set in masks of stoic, disciplined intensity. They moved with a predatory grace that spoke of a lifetime of training. Izuku's mind raced. Villains? No, they don't feel like villains. Their posture, it's military. A country's special forces? But whose? The leader, a woman with a gaze as hard and unyielding as diamond, stepped forward. An intricate, panther-like pauldron rested on her shoulder. She held her spear not as a threat, but as an extension of her own body. Her eyes swept over him, taking in his bizarre green and black costume, his wild green hair, the flickering energy that danced around him, and the obvious, grievous injury to his arm. There was no pity in her eyes, only cold, professional assessment. He was a variable. An unknown. And in her world, unknowns were threats until proven otherwise. Waina Angabani? She commanded, her voice a low, powerful baritone that vibrated with authority. The language was completely foreign to him, a series of melodic clicks and deep vowels that he couldn't even begin to parse. Izuku knew that any sudden move, any aggressive action, would be a fatal mistake. These women were dangerous. He could feel it. More than that, he was an intruder in their land, wherever he was. He slowly, deliberately, relaxed his stance. He let the fizzling sparks of one for all die down. Holding up his uninjured left hand in a universal gesture of peace, he spoke in a clear, steady voice, hoping the tone, if not the words, would convey his intent. My name is Izuku Midoriya. I don't mean any harm. I don't know where I am. Can you help me? The woman's expression didn't change. His words were as meaningless to her as hers were to him. She barked a short command to the warriors flanking her. Two of them moved forward, their spears held at the ready. Izuku's entire body tensed, ready to spring away, to use what little power he had left to defend himself. But he held his ground. Fighting would only confirm their suspicions. He had to trust that they weren't just mindless killers. He stood his ground as they approached. They didn't attack. Instead, one of them produced a sleek, metallic device from her belt. It unfolded into a set of manacles that glowed with a soft blue light. He knew, instinctively, that those were not ordinary restraints. He looked from the cuffs to the leader's impassive face. He gave a slow, deliberate nod of submission. It was the hardest thing he'd ever had to do, to willingly surrender when his every instinct screamed at him to fight or flee. But it was the heroic thing to do. De-escalation. Understanding. As the energy cuffs snapped around his wrists, a numbing sensation spread through his body, and the last vestiges of One for All's power were instantly suppressed. The world tilted, the pain and exhaustion finally overwhelming him. His knees buckled, and he pitched forward, his consciousness fading into a gray haze. The last thing he saw was the leader's stern face looking down at him, a flicker of something, not pity, but perhaps profound curiosity, in her dark, unblinking eyes. Consciousness returned in jarring fits and starts. He was aware of movement, a smooth, silent gliding that felt faster than any car or train he'd ever been on. He was lying on a cool metal surface. Through a shimmering window, he saw blurs of green and brown, the jungle racing by at an impossible speed. Then, the world outside changed. The oppressive canopy of the jungle gave way to a brilliant, open sky. He was looking at a shield, a translucent, hexagonal barrier that rippled across the sky like a heat haze. They passed through it, and the air itself seemed to change, losing its wild, untamed edge and becoming clean and crisp. And then he saw it. His handler, the warrior woman, must have seen the change in his expression. She nudged his head slightly, directing his gaze. Izuku's pain, his fear, his confusion, it all evaporated, replaced by a single, overwhelming emotion, awe. They were flying towards a city. But it was like no city he had ever imagined. It was Burning Zana, the Golden City, the heart of Wakanda. Skyscrapers of black vibranium and polished glass soared towards the sky, their shapes inspired by the traditional rondavel huts of Africa, a perfect, breathtaking fusion of ancient tradition and hyperfuturistic technology. Gleaming, silent maglev trains zipped along elegant, suspended tracks that weaved between the buildings. Waterfalls cascaded down the sides of terrace structures, feeding into crystal-clear canals that ran alongside bustling, vibrant market streets. People in a mix of traditional, brightly colored robes and chic, modern attire walked the streets below, their faces filled with life and purpose. At the city center, a mountain had been carved into the shape of a colossal panther, a silent, eternal guardian watching over its people. This wasn't just a city. This was a paradise. A civilization so far beyond anything on his earth that it might as well have been magic. His analytical mind, the part of him that compulsively scribbled in his hero notebooks, was completely and utterly overwhelmed. Energy source? Propulsion systems? Structural integrity of those towers? The cloaking field, it must require a power output that's off the charts. The transport, a sleek, insect-like craft he now recognized as a Royal Talon fighter, banked gracefully and headed towards the grandest structure of all, a sprawling palace complex that seamlessly blended into the mountainside, its golden spires catching the afternoon sun. They landed on a platform with the silence of a falling leaf. The doors hissed open, and Izuku was pulled to his feet. His head swam, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from the sheer majesty of his surroundings. The air here smelled of clean stone, mountain flowers, and ozone. He was marched through polished halls, his bare feet cold against floors inlaid with veins of what he could only guess was pure vibranium. Guards, both men and women, in ornate silver and black armor, stood at perfect attention, their eyes following the strange, green-haired boy in the tattered costume. They led him to a pair of massive, carved doors, which swung open silently at their approach. He was guided into a vast, circular chamber. The room was dominated by a raised dais upon which sat a throne carved from a single piece of black stone. Sunlight streamed in from a high, arched window, illuminating the figure who sat upon it. It was a king. There was no other word for him. He was a man in his prime, exuding an aura of quiet, unshakable authority and deep intelligence. He wore regal, dark purple robes embroidered with silver, but beneath them Izuku could see the physique of a warrior, a coiled strength held in perfect reserve. His face was sharp and noble, his eyes holding the weight of a nation. This was King Chala, son of Chaka. Standing to the king's right was the warrior woman who had captured him. She stood ramrod straight, her spear held at her side, her face a mask of fierce loyalty. This was Okoye, general of the Dora Milaje, and to the king's left was a young woman who was practically vibrating with restless energy. She was younger than the others, perhaps his own age, dressed in a stylish, futuristic jumpsuit. Her eyes, wide and brilliant, were fixed on Izuku, not with fear or suspicion, but with an insatiable, scientific curiosity. She held a bracelet of intricate beads, her fingers dancing across them as if she were taking 1,000 mental notes. This was Princess Shuri, the technological genius behind Wakanda's wonders. Izuku was forced to his knees before the throne. The energy cuffs bit into his wrists, and the full weight of his impossible situation finally crashed down upon him. He was alone. He was injured. He was a universe away from everyone he knew and loved, a prisoner in a kingdom that shouldn't exist, kneeling before a king. Fear, a cold and sharp serpent, coiled in his gut. But as he looked up, past his own terror, he met the king's gaze. And in those dark, steady eyes he saw not malice, but a deep, searching intelligence. Chala looked at the boy before him, the strange, tattered clothes, the impossible green hair, the faint, residual energy that clung to him like a shroud, and the earnest, terrified, yet unbroken spirit shining in his emerald eyes. The silence in the throne room stretched, thick and heavy. Finally, the king leaned forward slightly, his voice calm, yet resonating with a power that filled the entire chamber. It cut through Izuku's daze, the words clear and precise, heavy with the weight of a crown and a country. "Who are you?" Chala asked, his gaze unwavering. "And what magic brought you to my land?" The room Izuku awoke in was a testament to the Wakandan philosophy he had glimpsed in the city, a seamless blend of minimalist comfort and overwhelming technological supremacy. There were no bars on the windows, no heavy steel door, no visible cameras. The walls were a soft, matte gray that seemed to absorb the light, and the far wall was a single, immense pane of smart glass, currently displaying a breathtaking, real-time panorama of burning Zana under a sky of deepening twilight. A bed, more a comfortable pallet on a low platform, was all the furniture he needed. He felt a distinct lack of threat, yet an unshakable certainty that he was completely and utterly contained. His right arm, which should have been a mangled mess of compound fractures, was perfectly whole. He flexed his fingers, rotated his wrist. There was no pain, only a faint, phantom ache, a memory of the agony. A thin, almost invisible silvery film covered the skin, flaking away like dust as he moved. He was clad not in his tattered hero costume, but in a simple, incredibly soft gray tunic and trousers that felt both light and impossibly durable. The silence was broken by a soft chime, and a section of the wall slid away with a near-soundless hiss, revealing the king's sister, Shuri. She strode in with an infectious, confident energy, flanked by two imposing Dora Milaje. She held a slate-like device that projected a shimmering, complex holographic image of Izuku's own DNA. "Good, you're awake," she said, her accent a beautiful, melodic blend of English and Kosa. Her eyes, bright with intellectual fervor, were already dissecting him. "I was beginning to worry my sedatives were too effective. The human baseline is so fragile." Izuku sat up, his heart pounding. "My arm, how?" "Sonic stabilizer to set the bones, followed by a nanite-laced vibranium cast that accelerated the cellular regeneration. Standard procedure," she explained with a dismissive wave of her hand, as if discussing how to toast bread. "What is not standard procedure is you. Your entire biology is a fascinating contradiction." She swiped a finger across the hologram, and it zoomed in on a specific genetic marker. "See this? Your cork factor, as you call it. In any other human, this would be classified as junk DNA, a dormant, useless anomaly. But in you, it's like someone crammed a supernova into a shoebox. The potential energy output is, well, it's frankly ridiculous." Before Izuku could process this, Shuri gestured to one of the Dora Milaje. The warrior stepped forward and offered him a small, silver disc. "Place this behind your ear," Shuri instructed. "It's a translation microbead. It will allow us to bypass the communication barrier." "My brother grows tired of my miming." Izuku hesitated for a fraction of a second before complying. He pressed the cool metal to the skin behind his ear. It adhered instantly, sending a faint, ticklish sensation through him before fading completely. "Can you understand me clearly now?" Shuri asked, a playful smirk on her lips. Izuku's eyes widened. He was hearing her speak Japanese. Perfect, unaccented Japanese. "Yes," he breathed out. "Perfectly, excellent. Now tell me everything," she said, her voice turning serious. "And I mean everything. My brother requires a full report, and I require data. Start with your world." "A planet of superhumans," explain, and so the interrogation began. It was unlike anything he had expected. King Chala and his general, Okoye, entered the room shortly after, taking seats on simple chairs that emerged from the floor. Chala was a silent, imposing presence, his eyes missing nothing, his posture radiating a regal calm that was more intimidating than any overt threat. Okoye stood beside him, her arms crossed, her expression a granite mask of suspicion. Izuku, prompted by Shuri's rapid-fire questions, told them his story. He spoke of the dawn of quirks, the societal chaos that followed, and the rise of the pro-heroes who brought order back to the world. He explained the hero system, the schools like UA, and the fundamental creed that drove them to risk their lives for the safety of others. When he spoke of All Might, his voice filled with a reverence that was almost religious. He described the symbol of peace, a pillar of hope who could stop a catastrophe with his smile alone. Chala's expression softened almost imperceptibly at this. He, a king who had inherited the mantle of his father, understood the weight of a symbol. "This power," Chala finally spoke, his translated voice a deep, resonant baritone. "This one for all. You say it was given to you?" "Yes, your majesty," Izuku said, bowing his head slightly. "It is a sacred torch, passed down from one generation to the next, to stand against the great evil." Okoye scoffed, a quiet, sharp sound of disbelief. "A borrowed power. How can you rely on something that is not truly your own? Strength should be earned." "Forged, it is earned," Izuku countered, his voice gaining a spark of passion. It's earned through the sacrifice of everyone who held it before me. I have to be worthy of their legacy every single day. The power isn't mine to keep, it's mine to use for others. His earnestness was palpable. It hung in the air, a stark contrast to the calculated suspicion of the room. He told them of the League of Villains, of All for One, and finally, of the battle with the Glimmer Gnome. He described the monster's reality-warping quirk, his desperate decision to use a 100% smash, and the horrifying sensation of being pulled into the rift. When he finished, silence descended once more. Chala stared at him, his gaze intense, as if trying to peer directly into his soul. It is an elaborate tale, Okoye stated flatly. A boy from another world, wielding the power of giants, appears in our borders at a time of unprecedented openness. Forgive me, my king, if I find the timing convenient. I'm not lying, Izuku insisted, his hands clenching into fists. I don't know how I got here, but I swear on my life, everything I've told you is the truth. Your life may be worth very little here, outsider, Okoye replied coolly. That is enough, General, Chala said, raising a hand. He turned his focus back to Izuku. Your story is difficult to believe, but the energy signatures Shuri has detected, your unique biology, they suggest you are not of this world. For now you will remain here. We must decide what is to be done with you. With that, the king rose and swept from the room, Okoye following like a shadow. Shuri lingered for a moment, her eyes still sparkling with 1,000 questions. Your energy signature, she mused, more to herself than to him. It's not singular. It's layered. Like a palimpsest. 8 distinct residual signatures wrapped around a blazing core. Fascinating. She tapped her kimono beads. Rest. We have much more to discuss. She left, and the wall hissed shut, leaving Izuku alone once more with the silent, glittering city and the crushing weight of his unbelievable reality. 2 days passed. Izuku was treated with a detached courtesy. He was given nutritious, if unfamiliar, food. His requests for information about his own world were met with polite but firm refusals. Shuri visited him several times, running more scans and peppering him with questions about quirk theory, a topic he was surprisingly adept at discussing. During one of these sessions, she moved him from his room to her personal laboratory. It was a place of controlled, brilliant chaos. Holographic schematics for everything from medical nanites to starship engines floated in the air. Robotic arms whirred and buzzed, assembling complex devices, and at the center of it all was a massive, spherical energy core, contained within a web of shimmering magnetic fields. This, she explained, was the lab's primary power source, a contained quantum reactor she had designed herself. Chala and Okoye were present, observing from a raised platform. The interrogation was to continue, with Shuri cross-referencing his testimony with data from her deep space scanners, which had indeed registered a massive, anomalous energy event 2 days prior, its origin point untraceable. The dimensional tearing you described, Shuri said, pacing around him while manipulating a hologram of the energy event. It would require a catastrophic energy release. Your 100% smash, as you call it, combined with the Noma's quirk, it created a reaction akin to puncturing a bubble. You didn't travel through space. You were shunted between the very membranes of reality. Izuku nodded, trying to follow the complex physics. So, can you reverse it? Can I get back, theoretically? Perhaps, Shuri admitted. But the calculations would be astronomical. The energy required would be immense. For now, it is impossible. You are, for all intents and purposes, stranded here. The word hit him like a physical blow. Stranded. A cold dread washed over him. His mother. All Might. His friends at UA. He might never see them again. His vision swam, and for a moment, the high-tech lab seemed to close in on him. It was then that the world dissolved into alarms. A piercing, high-frequency siren blared through the lab. Red lights flashed, bathing everything in a crimson glow. A synthesized voice, calm but urgent, echoed from the ceiling speakers. Warning! Quantum reactor core destabilizing. Containment field fluctuating. Meltdown imminent in 90 seconds. Shuri's face went pale. What? No, that's impossible. The regulators are triple redundant. She raced to a console, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. Something is causing a feedback loop. The energy output is climbing exponentially. I can't shut it down. Okoye immediately drew her spear, her body instinctively shielding Chala. Shuri! She yelled. What is happening? The magnetic containment is about to fail! The princess cried out, her usual playful confidence replaced by genuine panic. If that core breaches, it will release a wave of pure energy that will vaporize this entire wing of the palace. The Dora Milaje guards moved to evacuate the king, but Chala stood his ground, his eyes fixed on the violently pulsing sphere of light. The air grew thick, humming with a pressure that made Izuku's teeth ache. He saw it all in a fraction of a second. The escalating energy readings on the main screen. The stress fractures appearing in the containment field projector. The terrified look in Shuri's eyes. The guards trained for combat were hesitating, unsure how to fight a problem of pure physics. His body moved before his mind had a chance to weigh the consequences. There was no thought of being a prisoner, an outsider, a subject of suspicion. There was only the core, unwavering principle that had been beaten into him, that he had accepted with every broken bone. A hero saves people. The primary energy conduit! Izuku shouted, his voice cutting through the alarms. On the underside. If you can't shut it down, you have to vent the pressure. Shuri's head snapped towards him. He's right. But the emergency release valve is fused shut. I can't override it from here. Then I'll open it manually. One for all, full cowl, 8%. Green lightning exploded around him. In the space of a single heartbeat, he was a verdant blur. He shot past the stunned Dora Milaje, their spears still half raised. He vaulted over a console, his movements fluid and precise. He saw the conduit, a thick, armored channel running from the reactor to the palace grid. He saw the release valve, a heavy hatch glowing cherry red with heat. His mind, that analytical engine he so often used to dissect quirks, was now processing engineering schematics he was seeing for the first time. The valve was fused, but the conduit itself had a structural weak point near the junction. A sharp, focused impact there would rupture it, redirecting the energy surge safely into the mountain's bedrock. It would also put him directly in the path of the initial blast. He didn't hesitate. He leaped into the air, twisting his body, channeling the crackling power of One for All into his right leg. It's just like with the robot in the entrance exam, he thought, a strange sense of calm washing over him. Analyze, act, save. The consequences don't matter. Get down! He screamed back at the royal family. He swung his leg, the metal sole of his borrowed footwear poised to strike. Manchester. Smash! His foot impacted the conduit. The sound was not a loud explosion, but a deafening, high-pitched crack followed by a concussive roar as a torrent of pure, white-hot energy erupted from the rupture. The force of the blast threw him backwards like a ragdoll. He twisted in midair, positioning his body to shield Shuri, who was closest to the blast. The energy washed over him. It was like being hit by a freight train made of lightning. The pain was immediate and absolute. He felt the bones in his legs and his back snap, the sound sickeningly loud even over the roar of the venting energy. His world exploded into white-hot agony before plunging into darkness. He landed in a crumpled heap at the base of the console, his body broken and smoking. The alarms died down. The red lights gave way to the lab's normal, clean white illumination. The reactor core hummed softly, its light a stable, gentle blue. The crisis was over. Silence. Okoye was the first to move, her spear at the ready, her eyes wide with a stunned disbelief that shattered her stoic facade. Chala strode forward, his face a complex mask of shock, concern, and profound re-evaluation. Shuri, trembling, scrambled out from behind the console where Izuku's body had shielded her. "By Bast!" she whispered, looking at the boy's twisted limbs. Then they all saw it. It began subtly. The silvery film from the medical bay, traces of which were still on his skin, began to glow faintly. The bones in his legs, bent at impossible angles, began to shift and straighten with quiet, grinding sounds. The severe, third-degree burns that covered his back began to fade, the flesh stitching itself back together at a visible, unnatural rate. Powered by the latent life force of One for All, the Wakanda nanites were working at a pace their creators had never dreamed possible. Within a minute, his broken body was whole again, leaving only the tattered, scorched tunic as evidence of the damage he had taken. He was unconscious, but he was healing. Chala knelt beside the boy, his royal composure completely gone, replaced by a deep, resonant awe. He had seen the power of the heart-shaped herb. He had walked the ancestral plane. He was the Black Panther, a living legend. But he had never seen anything like this. He had witnessed an act of absolute, instinctive self-sacrifice from a complete stranger. A boy who had every reason to hate them, to fear them, had broken his own body to save them without a moment's hesitation. This was not the act of a spy or a madman. It was not a calculated move. It was the purest expression of a hero's heart. Okoye came to stand beside her king, her spear lowered. The suspicion in her eyes was gone, replaced by a grudging, profound respect. "My king," she began, her voice hoarse. "His character, it is unyielding," Chala finished for her, his eyes never leaving Izuku's peaceful, unconscious face. He rose to his full height, his decision made. The variable was now a known quantity. The potential threat had revealed his true nature. "He will not be our prisoner," Chala declared, his voice ringing with the authority of a king making a final, irrevocable judgment. "He will be our guest." He looked at his general, a new command in his eyes. "Okoye. From this moment on, he is under your charge. He is to be trained, integrated, observed. I want to understand the spirit that drives a boy to so willingly shatter himself for others." Okoye's back straightened. The command was a great burden, but also a great honor. She looked down at the strange, green-haired boy who had come from the sky. An outsider. A child. And impossibly a protector. "It will be done, my king," she said, her voice firm. As Izuku slept, a deep, healing sleep, his status had fundamentally changed. He was no longer just a castaway or a curiosity. He had passed the test he didn't even know he was taking, and in doing so, had taken his first, painful step toward forging a new destiny in the heart of the Golden City. Izuku Midoriya learned the definition of humility under the unforgiving Wakandan sun. His new life began not in a comfortable guest suite, but on the sun-baked, red earth floor of the royal training grounds. It was a vast, open-air complex nestled on a high plateau overlooking burning Zana. Here, the hum of the city was a distant murmur, replaced by the sharp crack of spear against shield, the rhythmic chants of warriors in training, and the authoritative bark of General Okoye. She stood before him now, a silhouette of crimson and gold against the brilliant blue sky. Her face, which he was learning could convey a universe of meaning with the slightest twitch of a muscle, was currently a mask of impenetrable stone. "You are a guest of the king," she began, her voice crisp and clear through his translation microbead. "You have shown the heart of a warrior. But the body is a clumsy, untrained thing. You fight like a storm, all thunder and unfocused lightning. A storm is powerful, yes, but it is also predictable. It exhausts itself. A true warrior is like the river, fluid, persistent, and capable of carving canyons from mountains, not with a single, clumsy strike, but with a lifetime of focused intent." Izuku, dressed in the simple, breathable training fatigues of the Wakandan army, nodded earnestly. "I understand, General. I'm ready to learn." Okoye's lips thinned into what might have been the ghost of a smile. "We shall see." Her idea of learning was, for Izuku, a brutal and systematic deconstruction of everything he thought he knew about fighting. His first sparring session was against Okoye herself. He activated One for All, full cal at a stable 8%, the familiar green energy crackling around him. He was faster, stronger, more powerful than any baseline human could ever hope to be. It should have been enough. It wasn't even close. He lunged, aiming a feint with his left fist to set up a powerful kick with his right leg, a basic component of his shoot style. Okoye didn't even seem to move. She simply shifted her weight, a subtle, fluid motion, and his kick, aimed at her center mass, sliced through empty air. Before he could recover his balance, the butt of her vibranium spear slammed into the back of his knee, buckling it instantly. He hit the ground with a surprised gasp. "Your movements are too large," she stated, her voice utterly devoid of condescension. It was a simple statement of fact. "You announce your every intention. Your power makes you arrogant in your approach. You assume the blow will land, so you do not properly prepare for the possibility that it will not. Get up. He scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment. He tried again. This time, he was faster, pushing his full cowl to 9%. He threw a flurry of attacks, jabs, hooks, sweeping kicks, trying to overwhelm her with sheer speed. It was like punching smoke. She moved with an economy of motion that was baffling. She didn't dodge so much as she simply wasn't there when his attack arrived. She used her spear not as a bludgeon, but as a third limb, redirecting his momentum, tapping his pressure points, and sweeping his legs out from under him. He spent more time on his back, staring up at the sky, than he did on his feet. After a particularly jarring takedown where she used his own forward momentum to flip him head over heels, he lay on the ground, panting, the dust sticking to his sweat-soaked skin. Power is a crutch, Okoye said, standing over him, not a single hair out of place. You lean on it. You expect it to solve your problems. Here, in Wakanda, we know that technology, strength, even the power of the Black Panther, are merely tools. The true weapon is the mind that wields them. Your body is a weapon. Your one for all is merely the force with which you swing it. If your technique is flawed, you will only injure yourself, no matter how much force you apply. Her words struck him with the force of a physical blow. She had, in a few short sentences, perfectly articulated the central struggle of his entire life as a hero. He had always been fighting his own quirk, always trying to control a power that threatened to tear him apart. He had focused so much on strengthening the vessel, he neglected the skill of the warrior within. His training was relentless. He was made to spar with the Dora Milaje, and the experience was humbling in a different way. Fighting one was a challenge. Fighting two was an exercise in futility. They moved with a synchronized grace, a hive mind of lethal efficiency. They didn't need to speak. A glance, a shift in posture, was all the communication they required. They taught him about fighting as a unit, about trusting a partner, about the spaces between the attacks. They drilled him in the fundamentals until his muscles screamed. He practiced spear forms, though his own was a simple wooden staff. He learned their fluid, circular footwork, designed to conserve energy and maintain perfect balance. He was forced to fight without his quirk for hours on end, relying only on the techniques they taught him. At first, he was clumsy, a newborn fawn trying to walk. But slowly, painfully, something began to click. He started to see the openings he'd always missed. He learned to read an opponent's posture, to anticipate their next move not with danger sense, but with pure, trained instinct. He started to integrate the Wakandan style into his own. His brawling became more precise. His movements, once explosive and linear, became more fluid and evasive. He was still a storm, but now, he was learning how to aim the lightning. When he wasn't being physically dismantled on the training grounds, Izuku's mind was working at a feverish pace. Shuri, seeing his insatiable need to analyze everything, had taken pity on his lack of pen and paper and gifted him a personal Kimoyo slate. It was a sleek, semi-transparent device that could project holograms, access the Wakandan information network, and record data at the speed of thought. For Izuku, it was the greatest gift he could have ever received. His Hero Analysis for the Future was reborn in a Wakandan edition. The pages, now holographic and infinite, were filled not with the quirks of his classmates, but with the wonders of a hidden nation. He spent hours rewatching recordings of his spars with Okoye, breaking down her movements frame by frame. He filled the slate with intricate diagrams of her fighting style, his own scribbled notes, filling the margins. Economy of motion is key. Never a wasted step. Uses the spear to control distance and create barriers. Attacks are aimed at joints and nerve clusters, not just center mass. Maximum effect, minimum effort, he observed the other warriors. The border tribe's horsemen, with their powerful, brawling style. The river tribe's elegant, almost dance-like swordplay. He even managed to get recordings of the Jabari, marveling at the raw, primal power of Mbaku's guerrilla-inspired combat. His analysis was so detailed, so insightful, that when Shuri happened to glance at his work, she was taken aback. You see the mathematics in their movements, she commented one afternoon, leaning over his shoulder in her lab. Izuku jumped, startled. He hadn't heard her approach. "Oh, Princess Shuri! I was just, analyzing my general's fighting style as if it were a complex physics equation," she finished for him, a wide grin spreading across her face. "Don't be embarrassed. It's brilliant. You have the mind of an engineer. You see systems, patterns. Most warriors only feel the fight. You seek to understand its design." This became their ritual. Izuku would spend his evenings in a corner of her lab, nursing his bruised muscles and filling his slate with data. His analysis expanded beyond martial arts. He was obsessed with vibranium. He filled pages with theories on its kinetic energy absorption, its unique molecular structure, and its potential applications. He drew crude, but surprisingly insightful, diagrams of the maglev train's propulsion system and the city's sonic dampeners. Shuri, in turn, was fascinated by his world. She would sit with him, peppering him with questions about quark science. "So this Bakugo boy," she said one evening, swiping through the digitized pages of his old notebooks which he had managed to recreate from memory. "His quirk allows him to secrete nitroglycerin like sweat and ignite it at will. The biological mechanism for that must be fascinating. Does he have specialized glands? A blast-resistant epidermis? What is his caloric intake to produce such a volatile compound? He just gets angry and explodes a lot," Izuku mumbled, which sent Shuri into a fit of laughter. "Explosive anxiety. I love it." It was in these moments that their friendship truly began to cement. He was no longer just a subject of her scientific curiosity. She saw in him a kindred spirit, a mind that relentlessly sought to understand the world around it. And he saw in her not just a princess or a genius, but a girl his own age who delighted in creation and discovery. He showed her his detailed analysis of All Might's fighting style, explaining how he could change the weather with a single punch by creating a massive shift in air pressure. Shuri, in turn, showed him her own notebooks, holographic archives of her wildest prototypes. Hover skates that had a tendency to phase through solid matter. A communications device designed to translate the chittering of meerkats. "A work in progress," she'd sigh. An automated hair braiding machine that had accidentally given a training dummy a mohawk. They laughed, they debated, they theorized. In this brilliant, chaotic lab, a universe away from home, Izuku felt a sense of belonging he hadn't realized he was so desperately missing. Shuri didn't see him as the fragile, quirkless boy he used to be, or as the inheritor of a crushing legacy. She saw him as Izuku, the brilliant, slightly anxious analyst who happened to have a supernova crammed into his cells. He became the earnest older brother she could bounce ideas off of, and she, the teasing, impossibly smart younger sister who saw the world as a puzzle just waiting to be solved. It was during one of his training sessions that Shuri's curiosity turned into a full-blown engineering project. She was observing from the sidelines, her kimono beads projecting a real-time biometric scan of Izuku as he sparred with two Dora Milaje. He was doing better. He was using their techniques against them, evading, parrying, and creating openings. But to win, to truly push them back, he still needed to tap into the raw power of One for All. He flared his power to 10% for a split second, delivering a powerful kick that sent one of the warriors sliding back several feet. On Shuri's display, a dozen red alerts flashed. "Microfractures in the tibia and fibula," she murmured to herself. "Extreme strain on the metatarsal ligaments. Cellular degradation at the point of impact." The nanites in his system were already working, healing the damage almost as soon as it occurred, but the data was undeniable. "His body," she concluded, "is a flawed vessel for an infinite power source. It's inefficient. It's like trying to run a maglev train on a pair of AA batteries. It works, for a moment, but it will inevitably destroy the conductor." That evening, she called him over to the lab's main holographic display. "We need to talk about your suit," she said, pulling up an image of his battered, torn hero costume. "Gamma version, correct? Designed by Mei Hatsum of your UA High? Clever girl. The arm bracers to support your ligaments, the iron soles to add impact. It's a good start. But it's like putting a bandage on a broken dam. We can do better." She swiped the image away and replaced it with a 3D anatomical model of Izuku, glowing with the energy signature of One for All. "The problem is not just support. It's energy management. Your body cannot safely contain the kinetic backlash of your own power. So, we will build a suit that can. What followed was the most exciting collaborative project of Izuku's life. It was a fusion of his heroic identity and Wakanda's technological soul. First, the material, Shuri explained, pulling up a shimmering black holographic textile. A micron-thin vibranium alloy mesh. It will be woven into the primary fabric. It won't just block attacks from the outside. It will absorb the kinetic energy from the inside. When you kick or punch, the vibranium will absorb a significant percentage of the recoil, distributing it harmlessly across the entire surface of the suit. It turns your whole body into a shock absorber. Izuku's eyes were wide with wonder. That would reduce the strain exponentially. Exactly. Shuri grinned. Now your arms? She zoomed in on the model's arms, overlaying a complex schematic. Your old bracers were passive support. These will be active stabilizers. She designed sleek, dark green gauntlets that mirrored the aesthetic of his original costume. They contain microgyroscopes and a kinetic field generator. When they detect the telltale energy spike of a high-output smash, they will project a localized energy field to reinforce your bone structure from the outside, holding your arm together at the moment of impact. So I could use my arms again? Izuku whispered, the thought almost too much to hope for. He instinctively touched his scarred right arm. For higher percentage attacks, yes. Within reason. Shuri cautioned. This is a fail-safe, not a license for reckless behavior. Which brings us, she said, her grin widening, to the best part, your shoot style. She focused the hologram on the boots. They kept the iron soles of his original design, but the entire boot was re-engineered. The boots are the key, she declared. We're keeping the red color, of course. A hero needs his signature look. She winked. But the soles will be lined with kinetic energy recyclers. When you land from a great height, or when you kick something, the dampeners in the sole will absorb the impact energy. Some of it will be vented as harmless light and heat, but the rest will be stored in compact power cells in the heel. Izuku's mind was racing. Stored for what? For whatever you want, Shuri exclaimed, throwing her hands up in excitement. A small concussive blast from your heel to change direction midair? A powered-up jump? We could even channel it into a short-range EMP. Your fighting style generates a massive amount of waste energy. It's time we started recycling. Over the next week, they refined the design. Izuku provided practical insights, sketching out armor placement on the slate to protect his vitals without restricting mobility. He insisted on keeping the familiar green color scheme and the all-might-inspired ear-like appendages on the cowl. It was his link to his past, to his dream. Shuri respected that, seamlessly integrating the old with the new. The suit became a symbol of his new reality. It was a perfect synthesis of his origins and his present circumstances. It was the heart of a boy from Mizurufu, Japan, clad in the genius and power of Wakanda. One evening, as they finalized the schematics, Izuku looked at the final holographic rendering of the suit. It was beautiful. Sleek, powerful, and unmistakably him. He saw his reflection in the holographic light, and for the first time since the rift had torn him from his world, the crushing weight of his despair began to lift, replaced by a fragile, but persistent, spark of hope. He looked at Shuri, who was watching him with a warm, knowing smile. Thank you, Shuri, he said, his voice thick with emotion. For everything. Don't thank me yet, Midoriya, she replied, her eyes twinkling as she initiated the fabrication sequence. You still have to survive Okoye's training long enough to actually wear it. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if he would ever get home. But as he stood there, in the heart of the most advanced city on Earth, with a new friend by his side and the promise of a new strength being forged in light and metal, he knew one thing for certain. He was no longer just a lost hero. He was adapting. He was evolving. He was forging a new path. The quiet moments were the most disorienting. In the heat of training, under Okoye's unblinking gaze, or in the brilliant chaos of Shuri's lab, Izuku could focus. He had a mission, a tangible goal: improve, adapt, understand. But in the stillness of the pre-dawn hours, sitting cross-legged on the balcony of his new quarters overlooking the sleeping Golden City, the crushing immensity of his situation would return. He was adrift in an ocean between worlds. The faces of his mother, All Might, Uraraka, and Ida were ghosts that haunted the edge of his memory, their voices faint echoes he strained to hear. He would trace the lightning-like scars on his arm, a physical map of his journey, and wonder if they were all that was left of his old life. Was he still Izuku Midoriya, the boy who inherited One for All, or was he becoming someone else entirely? It was during one such moment of contemplative solitude that the whispers began. He had been attempting to meditate, a practice Okoye insisted was as vital as any spear form. A warrior's mind must be a calm lake, she had told him. Not a churning sea. His mind, however, was stubbornly oceanic. But as he forced his frantic thoughts to quiet, focusing on his breathing, a new sensation bloomed in the core of his being. It was One for All. But it was different. Back home, the quirk was a roaring furnace within him, a constant, blazing presence. Here it felt distant, muted, like hearing a symphony through a thick wall. Yet now, in this deep quiet, he could feel faint stirrings within that dampened fire. He closed his eyes and pushed his consciousness inward, following the thread of power to its source. The world dissolved, and he found himself in a familiar, yet strangely altered space. It was the vestige world, the psychic landscape where the consciousnesses of the previous One for All users resided. But it was fractured. Shards of darkness, like broken glass, floated in the void, and the figures of his predecessors were indistinct, their forms flickering like weak holograms. The dimensional barrier was a powerful form of interference. One figure, however, was clearer than the others. A woman with kind eyes and dark hair that floated as if underwater. A small, permanent beauty mark rested below her lip. Nana Shimura, the seventh user, All Might's master. Can you hear me, child? Her voice was not a sound, but a direct impression on his mind, filled with a gentle, yet powerful, warmth. Nana Shimura. Izuku thought back, his psychic voice trembling. You're so faint. The connection is strained, she confirmed, her form wavering. We are far away. But the heart of the quirk is with you. Always. We can feel your struggle. Your loneliness. A wave of emotion, so potent it was almost a physical blow, washed over Izuku. Tears welled in his eyes, even in this non-physical space. To have a connection, however tenuous, to the legacy he thought he had been completely severed from, was an anchor in his storm-tossed existence. I don't know what to do, he confessed, the admission costing him a great deal of his carefully constructed composure. I have a duty, to you, to All Might, to stop All for One. But I'm trapped here. I'm failing you. Nana's spectral form drifted closer. The other vestiges, the imposing silhouette of Daigoro Banjo, the stern-faced Heike Shinomori, remained in the background, their presence a quiet, supportive hum. It was Nana who was the emissary. A hero's duty is not bound by a single villain or a single world, she replied, her voice resonating with a wisdom that transcended lifetimes. Look around you, Izuku Midoriya. Truly look. What do you see? His mind's eye shifted. He saw the proud, disciplined faces of the Dora Milaje. He saw Shuri's brilliant, mischievous grin. He saw Chala's regal brow, furrowed with the weight of his nation. He saw the vibrant streets of Burning Zana, filled with families, merchants, and children. He saw a nation built on honor, tradition, and a fierce, unwavering desire to protect its own. I see a home, Izuku realized, the thought surprising him. Yes, Nana affirmed. A home that needs protecting. The spirit of this land, it is strong. Ancient. It resonates with the core of One for All, the desire to protect, to nurture, to stand as a shield for the innocent. It is the same here as it is anywhere else in the vastness of creation. Your purpose has not been lost, child. It has simply been refocused. Her form flickered more violently. We cannot maintain this for long. But know this. One for All is more than just strength. It is a repository. A library of power. This new world, this new struggle, may force you to unlock pages you did not know existed. Be ready. You are a hero, Izuku Midoriya. Not because of where you are, but because of who you are. Now go. Protect this new home as you would your own. The connection snapped. Izuku's eyes flew open, the pre-dawn sky of Wakanda filling his vision. The whispers were gone, but their message lingered. A profound sense of peace settled over him. His purpose wasn't a failure, it was a continuation. He was still the ninth holder of One for All. He was still a hero. And this land, this strange and beautiful kingdom, needed a hero. Half a world away, in a cramped, greasy workshop hidden in the lawless badlands of Sambisa, a different kind of whisper was being heard. This one was not of hope, but of avarice. Ulysses Clow ran a filthy rag over the gleaming, sonic converter prosthetic that had replaced his left arm. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, hot metal, and cheap whiskey. Screens flickered around him, displaying seismic data, satellite imagery, and complex energy spectrum analyses. For years he had been obsessed with one thing, Wakanda. The mythical El Dorado, the source of the vibranium that had been stolen from him, that had cost him his arm. He had dedicated his life to finding a way back in, a way to bypass their accursed cloaking field. And 3 days ago, all of his listening posts, from the Indian Ocean to the Congo Basin, had screamed to life. For a period of 4.7 seconds, a burst of energy of an unknown type had erupted from a location deep within Wakanda's borders. It wasn't the clean, stable energy signature of processed vibranium. This was something else. Something wild, chaotic, and unbelievably powerful. It had a strange, multi-layered frequency that his systems were still struggling to comprehend. To Clow, it was the sound of a key being forged, a key that could unlock the door to the world's greatest treasure trove. Beautiful, ain't it? He cackled to himself, looking at the energy signature displayed on his main monitor, a jagged, violent spike of emerald green. Whatever you're hiding in there, Chala, you just turned on a great, big bloody welcome sign for old Clow. But he was a merchant of chaos, not a theoretical physicist. He needed help to understand, let alone weaponize, this new energy. And he knew just who to call. A holographic projector flickered to life, and the symbol of a stylized yellow octopus appeared, Advanced Idea Mechanics, or AIM. The radical science cult had fallen on hard times since the Aldrich-Killian debacle, but Splinter Cells still operated in the shadows, always hungry for new technology and new funding. The face that appeared was that of a woman named Dr. Eris Thorne. She was severe and calculating, her eyes holding the cold, amoral curiosity of a scientist who saw the world as a series of variables to be manipulated. "Clow," she said, her voice clipped and devoid of warmth. "This had better be worth my time. My research into gamma radiation absorption doesn't pause for arms dealers." "Oh, it's worth your time, love," Clow said, taking a swig of whiskey. He gestured to the energy reading. "Take a look at this pretty picture. Detected it emanating from deep inside our favorite fantasy kingdom. What's it look like to you?" Thorne's eyes narrowed, her professional interest piqued. She zoomed in on the data, her own systems linking with his. "The frequency is unstable. It's not a single emission. It's a cascade, a dimensional echo. This isn't the signature of a weapon being fired, it's the signature of a hole being punched in reality." Clow's grin widened. "A hole, you say? I like the sound of that. Tell me, Doctor, if one were to replicate this frequency, say, on a larger scale, what do you think would happen to a big, fancy cloaking shield powered by stable vibranium?" A slow, predatory smile spread across Thorne's face. "It would be like striking a crystal goblet with the perfect resonant frequency. The shield wouldn't just be bypassed. It would shatter." The deal was struck. Clow would provide the funding and the muscle. AIM would provide the science. Thorne and her team of rogue geniuses would work to build a weapon, a massive sonic cannon tuned to the precise, chaotic frequency of that dimensional tear. But first, they needed more data. The initial burst was a single note. They needed the whole song. They needed to get closer, to provoke another reaction, to map the energy in detail. They needed to poke the panther. Life in Bernine Zana had a rhythm. The mornings were for training, the afternoons for study and collaboration with Shuri, and the evenings for quiet reflection. Izuku was growing stronger, faster, more skilled. The clumsy storm was becoming a focused tempest. He was beginning to feel less like a castaway and more like a part of the city's complex, vibrant machinery. The first sign that this new peace was about to be broken came not as a roar, but as a silent, digital scream. Izuku was in the palace's central command center with Chala and Okoye, observing the intricate dance of Wakanda's global monitoring systems. Holographic globes spun in the air, tended to by technicians in crisp, white uniforms. It was a place of calm, controlled vigilance. Suddenly, a red alert flashed on the main display. A remote border outpost on the eastern frontier, designated Outpost Jabulani, had gone silent. Report, Chala commanded, his voice sharp. All communications cut, my king. A technician replied, her fingers flying across a console. Life sign indicators are gone. We've lost the entire outpost. Okoye was already moving, her face grim. The border tribe are our first line of defense. They are not easily silenced. This was not a random animal attack. Bring up the satellite feed, Chala ordered. Rewind to the moment we lost contact. The main screen flickered, showing a high-altitude, thermal image of the outpost. It was a small, fortified encampment nestled in a dense jungle ravine. Izuku watched, his heart beginning to pound with a familiar, pre-battle rhythm. He saw the heat signatures of the border tribe warriors patrolling the perimeter. Then, he saw the anomalies. Multiple heat signatures, appearing at the edge of the jungle. They were moving fast, too fast for ordinary men. They converged on the outpost from 3 directions. The feed dissolved into a storm of static and energy interference. Before it cut out completely, a single, clear image came through. It was a group of mercenaries, clad in advanced, yellow and black tactical gear bearing the AIM octopus symbol. They were armed with strange-looking rifles that pulsed with a sickly yellow light. One of the border tribe warriors, a powerful man armed with a vibranium shield and spear, charged them. One of the AIM soldiers fired his weapon. A beam of pure, concussive sound erupted from the barrel, and the warrior's shield, a material that could stop a tank shell, vibrated so violently it shattered into 1,000 pieces. The warrior himself was thrown back, his armor crumpling. The feed went dead. A cold silence fell over the command center. AIM, Chala said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. They dare bring their perversions of science to our doorstep. And that weapon, Okoye murmured, her knuckles white where she gripped her spear. It negated the vibranium. Izuku's mind was already working, analyzing the brief snippet of combat he'd witnessed. Sonic disruptors. High-frequency, focused sound waves. They're not breaking the vibranium. They're using resonance to overwhelm its ability to absorb kinetic energy. That's how Claw must have broken out of his prison in Busan. This is his technology. Chala turned, his regal robes seeming to melt away, replaced by the aura of the Predator. General. Mobilize a strike team. I will meet them in the field. My king, Okoye said, bowing her head. I'm coming with you. Izuku said, the words leaving his mouth before he'd even consciously decided to speak. Chala and Okoye both turned to look at him. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A declaration. This is not a training exercise, Midoriya, Okoye said, her voice stern. This is real. These men are killers, armed with technology specifically designed to defeat us. I know, Izuku replied, his gaze steady, meeting hers without flinching. You've trained me for this. You said my heart was a warrior's. Let me prove it. Let me help protect this nation. He had almost said my home. The word hung in the air between them, unspoken but understood. Chala studied him for a long moment. He saw not the frightened boy who had knelt in his throne room, but a young man filled with a quiet, burning resolve. He saw the same spirit of selfless duty he saw in his Dora Milaje, the same fire he felt in his own heart when his people were threatened. He had offered this boy sanctuary. Now, the boy was offering his strength in return. To refuse would be to deny the very spirit he had come to respect. Shuri has been working on something for you, Chala said, a silent command passing between him and Okoye. A gift. It is time you received it. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. Go. Suit up. A surge of adrenaline, gratitude, and fierce determination shot through Izuku. He bowed deeply to the king and then raced from the command center, his destination the one place that now felt as much like home as any other, Shuri's lab. He had a battle to fight, and for the first time, he would face it not just as Izuku Midoriya, but as a protector of Wakanda. The interior of the Royal Talon fighter was a study in controlled urgency. It sliced through the Wakandan sky, a silent, obsidian predator on a mission of vengeance. The usual low hum of its engines was the only sound, a stark contrast to the thundering of Izuku Midoriya's own heart. He sat strapped into a troop deployment seat, the cool, recycled air doing little to calm the fire in his veins. Across from him, King T'Challa was a portrait of lethal stillness. He was no longer the monarch in regal robes. He was the Black Panther. The iconic, panther-like helmet was retracted, revealing a face set with the grim focus of a hunter on the trail. The nanites of his suit flowed over his body like liquid night, forming a second skin of pure, weaponized vibranium. He didn't fidget. He didn't speak. He simply was, a coiled spring of kinetic potential, waiting for the moment to strike. Izuku, by contrast, felt like a live wire. Every nerve ending was alight with a mixture of terror and exhilarating purpose. He was wearing his new suit, and it felt less like a costume and more like an extension of his own being. Shuri had dubbed it the Emerald Panther suit, a name that made him blush but also filled him with a fierce sense of pride. The vibranium alloy mesh was feather-light yet felt as strong as steel, molding perfectly to his form. The dark green gauntlets gleamed under the ship's interior lights, humming with a barely perceptible energy. He flexed his fingers, feeling the micro-gyroscopes within them were to life, a silent promise of stability. But it was the boots he couldn't stop looking at. The familiar, defiant red of his shoot style was there, a bold statement against the suit's muted greens and blacks. They felt solid, grounded, as if they were physically connected to the power of the land itself. "Are you ready, Izuku Midoriya?" T'Challa's voice cut through his thoughts, deep and resonant. He used his full name, not as a formality, but as a sign of respect. This was not a boy being taken to a fight. This was a warrior being acknowledged by his king. Izuku looked up, meeting T'Challa's intense gaze. He took a deep, steadying breath, the lessons of Okoye's meditation practice anchoring him. "Yes, my king. I am." "Fear is a companion on the battlefield," T'Challa said, his eyes holding a flicker of ancient wisdom. "It sharpens the senses. Do not fight it. Listen to it. Let it warn you. But do not let it command you. Today, you fight not for a grade, or for a rank, but for the lives of my people. There is no greater purpose." A chime echoed through the cockpit. 5 minutes to the target zone, my king, came the pilot's voice over the comms. Okoye's voice followed immediately after, a sharp, clear presence from the command center in Bernin Zana. "Visuals are still offline, but we are picking up multiple energy signatures on the ground, consistent with the AIM weaponry. I count 12 hostiles, dug into defensive positions around the outpost. Be wary of the ravine's topography. It creates multiple blind spots." "Understood, General," T'Challa replied, his own helmet flowing into place over his face with a soft hiss, the silver eye lenses glowing with an intimidating light. "Midoriya, our objective is twofold. We neutralize the threat, and we capture one of them for interrogation. We need to know why Clow has allied himself with AIM, and what they hope to gain by attacking us." "Subdue, not kill," Izuku affirmed, the core tenet of his own hero philosophy aligning perfectly. "We strike with the force of a storm," the Black Panther declared, rising from his seat as the Talon fighter began its silent descent. "But we show mercy. That is the Wakandan way." The rear ramp of the craft began to lower, revealing the dense, steaming jungle below. "They will expect an attack from the air. We will give them one from the ground." "On my mark." They stood at the edge of the ramp, the wind whipping at them. Below, the jungle canopy was a sea of green. T'Challa pointed to a spot a kilometer north of the outpost's last known position. "We land there. We approach on foot. Let the jungle be our shield." Izuku nodded, his mind already mapping the terrain, calculating approach vectors. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was overshadowed by an overwhelming focus. He was a hero. This was his calling. With a shared, silent nod they leaped. The jungle floor was a world of shadow and sound. They moved through the thick undergrowth with a silence that defied their speed. T'Challa was a ghost, his vibranium-soled feet making no sound on the damp earth. He flowed between the colossal trees, a patch of mobile darkness. Izuku, following his lead, was a different kind of silent. He used a low-level full cowl, a mere 3%, just enough to enhance his agility and speed without the telltale crackle of lightning. He leaped over fallen logs and slid under low-hanging vines, his new suit moving with him as if it were part of his skin. As they drew closer, the acrid smell of ozone and burned metal reached them, a profane scent in the pristine jungle air. The outpost was a scene of calculated destruction. The main gate was blasted inwards, its metal warped and blackened. The bodies of the border tribe warriors lay where they had fallen, their proud, crimson uniforms stained with dirt and blood. A cold, professional rage settled over Izuku. This wasn't a battle, it was an execution. The IM mercenaries were exactly where Okoye had said they would be. Clad in their yellow hazmat-style combat suits, they had formed a defensive perimeter, setting up energy shields and automated turrets. Several of them were attempting to interface with the outpost's comms tower, while others stood guard, their sonic disruptor rifles sweeping the jungle. "They are trying to hack our network," Chala whispered, his voice a low growl in Izuku's earpiece. "Fools!" He pointed. 2 on the west flank. 2 on the east. 4 at the comms tower. The remaining 4 are on overwatch on the ridge. You take the west. I will take the east. We strike simultaneously. Create chaos. Once their formation is broken, focus on protecting any survivors you may find. I will deal with the ones at the tower. Izuku gave a single, sharp nod. Create chaos. He could do that. They separated, melting back into the jungle. Izuku circled around, his heart pounding a steady, powerful rhythm against his ribs. He watched the 2 mercenaries on his side. They were arrogant, confident in their technology, their backs turned to the jungle they believed was empty. A fatal mistake. Chala's voice came, a single word of command. Now. Izuku exploded from the treeling, 1 for all, full cowl 15%. The green lightning that erupted around him was no longer a wild, uncontrolled aura. It was a focused, crackling sheath of power. The vibranium mesh of his suit seemed to hum in response, containing and channeling the energy. He covered the 50 meters to the mercenaries in the time it took them to register his presence. One of them turned, his eyes widening in his helmet. He raised his sonic rifle, but it was far too late. Izuku didn't slow down. He leaped, twisting his body into a devastating axe kick. Manchester. Smash! His red boot connected with the ground in front of the 2 soldiers. The result was spectacular. The kinetic force of his kick, amplified by the iron soul and 1 for all, was driven directly into the earth. The ground itself erupted. A shockwave of dirt, rock, and splintered wood blasted outwards, throwing both mercenaries off their feet like dolls. They landed in a heap, their armor dented, their weapons flying from their hands. Before they could recover, Izuku was on them, a quick, precise chop to the back of their necks rendering them unconscious. On the other side of the compound, a blur of black descended upon the eastern flank. The Black Panther was a whirlwind of claws and silent fury. He moved with a speed and ferocity that was almost supernatural, disabling both mercenaries before they could even fire a shot. Hostiles on the west and east are down, Izuku reported, his voice steady despite the adrenaline singing in his veins. Well done, Chala's voice came back, calm and deadly. Now, the real fight begins. Chaos erupted in the outpost. The remaining AIM soldiers opened fire, their sonic disruptors sending waves of shimmering, invisible force tearing through the jungle. Trees splintered and exploded under the sonic assault. Izuku dove behind the blasted remains of a barricade, the sound waves washing over his position with a deafening, bone-jarring hum. His suit's vibranium mesh vibrated intensely, absorbing the worst of the impact, but he still felt the pressure in his bones. He saw the Black Panther, a streak of black lightning, zigzagging across the open ground, his suit absorbing the sonic blasts with bright purple flashes of light. He was heading for the comms tower, a direct, unstoppable assault. The 4 soldiers on the ridge opened fire on Chala, trying to cut him off. That was Izuku's cue. While they were distracted, he had a new objective. My king, there's a survivor! he yelled into his comms. He had spotted him, a border tribe warrior, his leg pinned beneath a collapsed watchtower, trying desperately to reach for his spear as two of the AIM soldiers from the tower group advanced on him. "Protect him!" Chala commanded, his voice strained as he absorbed a direct hit from a sonic blast that sent him sliding back several feet. "I will handle these." Izuku's purpose narrowed to a single, burning point. "Save him!" He burst from behind his cover. The two mercenaries saw him coming and immediately turned their weapons on him. Two beams of pure sound converged on his position. Instinct and Okoye's training took over. He didn't try to power through it. He dropped low, sliding across the churned-up earth, the beams passing harmlessly over his head. He pushed off with his hands, flipping back onto his feet, and launched himself forward again. He was a green and red blur, a chaotic, unpredictable force. He reached them in seconds. One soldier swung his rifle like a club. Izuku ducked under it, his movement fluid and economical. He slammed his palm into the soldier's chest, not a smash, but a focused, powerful shove, and then used the Wakandan technique Okoye had drilled into him, redirecting the man's momentum and sending him spinning into his partner. The two men stumbled, their formation broken. Izuku didn't give them a moment to recover. He leaped into the air, channeling one for all into his legs. St. Louis. Smash! He delivered a blindingly fast roundhouse kick, the reinforced sole of his boots slamming into the helmets of both men with a sickening crunch of metal and plastic. They crumpled to the ground, unconscious. He raced to the trapped warrior's side. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice urgent. The warrior, a large, powerfully built man with tribal markings on his face, stared at him with wide, pain-filled eyes. He looked from Izuku's strange, glowing form to the fallen AIM soldiers, then back again. What are you?" The warrior grunted, his voice thick with pain. "A friend," Izuku replied simply. "We're going to get you out of here." He braced himself, grabbing the heavy, metal and wood beam of the watchtower. He channeled 20% of one for all into his arms and back, the new suit straining but holding, the stabilizers in his gauntlets glowing brightly. With a great roar, he lifted the massive weight, straining for only a second before tossing it aside. Suddenly, a new voice echoed in his ear, this one filled with a youthful, almost giddy excitement. "Hey, Midoriya! How's the new suit working out? My sensors are showing a massive power surge. Try not to break my toys on their first day out, yeah?" "Shuri!" Izuku gasped, dragging the injured warrior towards the relative safety of the main building. "Now's not really the time." "Nonsense, it's the perfect time for field testing," she retorted. "I'm routing all of the suit's diagnostic data to the command center." Okoye is impressed. She's not saying it, but her heart rate has lowered by 12%, which is basically a standing ovation from her. From across the compound, Izuku heard a massive explosion. He looked up to see the Black Panther literally tearing apart the mercenaries on the ridge. Chala had closed the distance, and in close quarters, the sonic rifles were useless. His vibranium claws shredded their armor, and his powerful strikes sent them flying. He fought with the righteous fury of a king avenging his people. "4 hostiles remaining, my king," Okoye's voice announced. "The ones who were working on the comms tower. They are mine," Chala growled. But as Chala advanced, the 4 remaining soldiers formed a semicircle, their rifles glowing ominously. They weren't aiming at the king. They were aiming at Izuku and the wounded soldier he was shielding with his own body. It was a trap. A classic pincer move. They were using Izuku as bait. "It's an overload sequence," Shuri's voice screamed in his ear. "They're linking their rifles to fire a single, focused blast. The suit can't take a hit like that, Midoriya. You have to move." But he couldn't move. The wounded warrior was behind him. If he dodged, the soldier would be vaporized. It was the same choice he'd made in Shuri's lab, the same choice he'd made against Muscular. The choice was never a choice at all. He planted his feet, a defiant lighthouse against the coming tidal wave. He crossed his arms in front of his chest, channeling every ounce of power he could safely manage. 15%. 20%. The green lightning around him grew wild and incandescent. The vibranium mesh in his suit glowed with contained energy. "Midoriya!" Chala roared, realizing what was about to happen. The 4 AM soldiers fired. A single, massive beam of white sonic energy, thick as a tree trunk, screamed across the clearing, aimed directly at Izuku's heart. Time seemed to slow down. He saw the beam coming. He felt the suit's system screaming warnings at him. He heard Shuri's panicked voice, Chala's roar, the grateful gasp of the man behind him, and then he remembered Shuri's words. The boots are the key. We started recycling. A desperate, brilliant idea sparked in his mind. It was insane. It was untested. It was his only shot. Instead of bracing for impact, he did the last thing anyone expected. He jumped. He angled his body so that the soles of his boots were facing the incoming blast. As the beam hit, an unimaginable force slammed into him. The sound was a physical entity, a solid wall that threatened to pulverize him. But the vibranium soles and the kinetic dampeners did their job. They didn't just block the energy, they absorbed it. The power cells Shuri had installed in his heels, designed to handle the impact of a fall from a skyscraper, were suddenly being force-fed the energy of 4 overloaded sonic cannons. Red warning lights flashed on Izuku's internal HUD. The suit's temperature skyrocketed. For a terrifying second, he thought his boots were going to explode, but they held. He was thrown backward through the air, tumbling end over end, but he was alive. And his boots were glowing like twin red suns, filled to bursting with recycled sonic energy. Shuri! He yelled, his voice ragged. How do I release the energy? Just kick! She screamed back, a note of manic triumph in her voice. I mapped the release to your primary combat function. Just kick something. The 4 AM soldiers were staring, dumbfounded at the fact he had survived. Chala was already charging them, but Izuku was closer. He righted himself in midair, aimed his feet at the stunned group, and kicked. He wasn't aiming to hit them. He was just aiming to release the stored energy. A massive, concussive blast of pure, focused kinetic force, a sonic boom made manifest, erupted from the soles of his boots. It wasn't a beam. It was a wave, a silent, invisible hammer that struck the 4 soldiers simultaneously. They were lifted off their feet and slammed into the comms tower behind them with enough force to dent the vibranium plating. They slid to the ground in a heap, armor cracked, completely unconscious. Izuku landed, his legs buckling slightly, the power cells in his boots smoking and drained. The clearing fell silent, the only sounds the crackle of fires and the groans of the wounded. The battle was over. He stood there, panting, the green lightning of one for all slowly subsiding. The wounded border tribe warriors were starting to emerge from the wreckage, their eyes filled with a mixture of pain, grief, and absolute awe as they stared at him. They began to murmur, their voices low and respectful, speaking a name for him in their native tongue. Yumvikeli Olalaza, one of them said, his voice filled with reverence. The Green Protector. Chala walked over to him, his Black Panther helmet retracting. His face was a mask of stern appraisal, but his eyes held a light that Izuku had never seen before, a deep, profound respect. He looked at the neutralized AM soldiers, at the rescued warrior, and at the impossible boy standing before him. You have a reckless spirit, Izuku Midoriya, the king said, his voice resonating with authority. But it is the spirit of a true guardian. He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. Today, you bled for Wakanda, you have earned your place here. Izuku looked around at the devastation, at the faces of the soldiers he had helped save. He had not fought for fame or glory. He had fought to protect. And in the heart of this foreign land, surrounded by strangers who now looked at him as a hero, he felt a powerful, undeniable sense of purpose. He was a long way from home, but for the first time, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be.